Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of Vox Vomitus. I am your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, the Hotel series, as well as the recently released Pretty Ugly. Joining me today, as always, is my Vox Vomitus vixen, Allison Martine, author of the Bourbon books. And today we are joined by special guest and one of my all-time favorite authors, Carol Goodman. And she's going to be talking about her new release, The Stranger Behind You. But we'll probably also just talk about like how weird and neurotic we are, because that's what we've been talking about for the past 10 minutes. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I just realized that my AOL was still on, so I went and silenced that. So
I love that you still have an AOL email address. I just feel like it's so like retro
chic. That's what I tell my students. That's what it's because it's Roman. Well, let me just give you the world my email address.
And I was going to say, are you going to give us all your email address?
You just about did. That was awesome.
But it's a particular two set of names with no numbers after it. So if I tried to get it on any other server, it would be such and such 211, and
right.
And it's my first email address.
and it's a great email address. It is. I'm like, oh, it's so good. And I know you wouldn't be able to get it anywhere else because not that I tried to get an email address like yours, but I would just say one of the words in your email address is the name of my spouse.
Okay, we've given half of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I've tagged you, Carol, on certain things, it always gets confused because I'm making sure I'm not tagging someone else because it's not your name at all. So I will sometimes say tag you and then say AKA Carol Goodman, so people know we're talking about you.
And then the other word is it's not doing that.
It knows we're talking about it.
This is because we've just secretly given away your email address, and now our viewers are like,
there was another tab open. Okay, it's gone.
Either they're emailing you or there's a security breach going on because someone's hacked you, in which case Jen is very sorry.
I'm very sorry. That's my fault.
I was thinking earlier today, I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing this great talk at 6 p.m. and I'm like, oh, this will be so much fun. And they're casual and they encourage cocktails. So I was like, I'm looking forward to this. So thanks for.
Well, I was so excited. You've been on our show before. You were on our show like a year ago. And you were a guest, I feel like, because I stalked you on the internet and just like flat out asked you. So then this time your publicist approached me and said, would you like to have Carol Goodman on your show? And I'm like, I would love that. She's been on my show before. And she was like, what? Like,
perhaps I had to loop her in.
I know. Because I've done that before with my publicist too. Like I just say yes to something. Sorry. And then he's like, did I book that? And I'm like, didn't you? So Carol, this book, The Stranger Behind You, was released on July 6th.
Mm-hmm.
I know the date very well because I wanted to release my book on that day. And then I said, I can't release my book on the same day as Carol Goodman. So I didn't. I pushed mine back a week. So tell us a little bit about this. We both read it, both loved it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So The Stranger Behind You, I think I have a copy here somewhere too. Yes.
It's behind you.
It's behind me, lurking and stalking me. So it starts with Joan Laurie is a young journalist, and she has written an expose exposing a prominent prominent owner of a newspaper of being a sexual predator. So this is a Me Too story. And the night that the story goes live, her magazine editor gives her a party, and she goes home. And when she goes home, she's attacked in her apartment. And she wakes up the next day. She doesn't know what happened to her. So she, in the post-traumatic stress of that, she finds she needs to find a safe place to be. And she ends up, she asks Alexa, what's the safest apartment in New York? And she gets the answer is the Refuge, which is a beautiful pre-war apartment building on the way upper west side in the neighborhood of Inwood. And then so she moves in there, finds out that it originally had been a Magdalene refuge. And she befriends a 90-something-year-old neighbor who had been an inmate in the Magdalene refuge. And then somebody else comes and moves into the building as well. So it's kind of a Me Too story with a background of this Magdalene refuge. So it has this historical 1941 story running parallel to the contemporary story.
I always love the way you blend the past and the present in your work. Like, it's like one of the reasons why you're one of my automatic buys. Like, anytime I hear you have a book coming out, I'm just like, oh, it doesn't matter. I don't even need to know what it's about. I don't need to know the title or the cover.
I'll figure it out as I read it.
Just like automatic, just like pre-order it. So I was so excited. This is going to sound weird. So excited about this story because like I've always been strangely obsessed with Magdalene laundries and Magdalene refuges. This also explains why I've vacationed to places like abandoned lunatic asylums and old prisons. So
I get it.
So I was really excited to kind of explore that with you through your writing. But then it also sent me on like a deep dive on the internet to figure out if this building, I know it doesn't exist now, but I think I found it.
You did. Yeah.
And it was gorgeous. And I'm like,
it was. Did you? I don't know if you have a picture of it to put up, but I somewhere in my files do. It was, in fact, there was a Magdalene refuge in Inwood Park. It did not become a ritzy apartment building. In fact, it stopped being a Magdalene refuge probably even before in my timeline. I have this woman Lillian was there in the 40s, but I think it stopped in the 30s. But it had been there, before the turn of the century, and it was described as the. So first of all, I read about it in an article by about Michelle Jones, who's an historian, and her work. She did work with women's prisons. And when I read about this, I was really shocked that there had been a Magdalene. First of all, that there were Magdalene laundries in the United States.
Yes.
I
and
didn't
in the 1900s.
Like, they're associated with Ireland. Is that right? Because there was some reference to that later in the book that's kind of where they originated. So maybe that the New York one's kind of an anomaly. Is that fair to say?
It's not actually. There were Magdalene laundries throughout the United States, which I completely did not know about. I forget how many, but there were quite, maybe over 100 throughout the country. So again, and they were different from the Irish ones in some significant ways, but they existed here. So that was shocking to me. And then shocking that it was in Inwood, because I have a connection with that neighborhood. My husband actually grew up in a neighborhood very close by, and he still has an apartment there that he uses as an office. And both my daughter and my stepdaughter live in Inwood. So I spend a fair amount of time in Inwood. And my husband has kind of always been interested in the history. So I said, do you know about this Magdalene laundry in Inwood? And he said, I have never heard of it. And he said that, he got out like these old history books of the neighborhood and said, and they're not in these books. And really pulled me in, because there was a sense to me of not only the unexpectedness that this existed, but that it had been kind of buried.
Yeah.
It covered up in living memory, that this had existed, and it's no longer talked about. So, that set me going. There was also a personal thread that sort of fed into that. But I love the idea of sort of recreating it. And, what if it still was there? What if it was still in Inwood Park, which it totally is not.
It's totally not. But if it was, it would be an expensive apartment. It really would, especially because Inwood's like the new neighborhood in New York, where it's like it's becoming the place to be. Again, when I fell down the rabbit hole of the stranger behind you. And I spent like multiple hours researching lots of Magdalene laundries and then the Inwood neighborhood. And then I realized I really probably should be working on my own book right now.
Or you write the sequel, because you probably know more about it than I do now. But it's an interesting neighborhood and a really fascinating history.
And I'm a sucker for like historic New York City apartment stories, especially with a sinister edge. I feel like I was like broken by Rosemary's Baby, and like every other book that has even like remotely that kind of thing going on. I love it. Just like give me a good creepy apartment.
Yes, and it's well, creepy buildings, I think, you know, are probably our jam. And so it's interesting,
weak spot.
that sense of you know, and also I think it's a way of looking at the Gothic in a slightly different way. Is, you know, and Rosemary's Baby is one of my absolute favorite books and movies. Yeah, going all the way back.
So I will. I'm sorry, I'm like dominating this conversation. I'll have like one last thing, and then we can start talking about our neuroses again. So I like that you just said it was another way of looking at the Gothic, because your work does tend to have like a Gothic tendency to it, and like a historical tendency. And this book, while it had those things, still it felt so modern, like even more modern than like your other work so far. I don't know if it was because of Me Too, or if because you know, people were talking to Alexa, and you know, and it just made me feel like it was so real. Like it's something. So was that a conscious effort on your part to say like, let's make it more tech?
Well, you know, I guess I was, I don't, how I was led into that is the main, well, there are two narrators, Joan, the reporter, and then an older woman, Melissa, who's the wife of the sexual predator. So having a young character, I just knew it had to be. And I do like the juxtaposition. I guess one of the books that kind of influenced that in terms of thinking about the Gothic was, now I'm forgetting there's one that's set in sort of a smart house, and I'm forgetting the author's name. So maybe someone could think of what that it's got a great sort of modern house. And I'm also some of Ruth Ware's work, where she, I think, brings in. So I'm interested to think about like what is the modern version of the Gothic. And one of the things, oh, now it's going to kill me that I don't remember the name of that other book. But one of the things I thought about was that in the Gothic, you know, there's always the room that the heroine is in, and the problem is she can't lock it. I think this is true in the Mysteries of Udolpho, where she goes up to her room and she's trying to lock her door so she'll be safe. And it you know, there's no key. She can't lock it. So she's vulnerable. And then also that she finds that there's a secret passageway that has
the back door.
Right. There's access. That's such a Gothic thing. And I think when I was thinking about that a couple of years ago, I thought, well, that's kind of like the open door for us is the internet, right? That we're, you know, this little camera that's, you know, recording us now. And all the people now have my email address. That's kind of a modern equivalent of the vulnerability of the, you know, the door we cannot close. And so I think it's fun to sort of play around with. I love every creaky old house. I love every mansion and woman fleeing from it in white nightgown. But I'm also always like, there's something about this that, you know, what is the modern equivalent of this? And what is the, how does that translate for us now? You know, what are the perils women face now? What are, you know, even with all our gadgets, you know, how are we still vulnerable? Or how do our gadgets make us vulnerable?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say when you said, how do our gadgets make us vulnerable? Because we watched this person go from, okay, I'm not safe here, I need to go to a safer location. And then she brings in all these things that end up opening more doors and making her more vulnerable in ways that she doesn't even know she's vulnerable. And everything from how the email on her computer is being used or used against her, and access to the house, and even cameras, like our little cameras here, and how those are being used, all of those things wrapped together. And you did that very, very well. But I like that you had an older character and a younger character because their approaches were so different. And although I will resent that I'm closer in age to the older character.
Well, I was going to say that when she said there's an older character, and I was like, I think she was my age.
She's a friend of mine who is a romance writer. She's what we call faux old. You know,
What is faux old?
Faux old is where you want a character representing an older woman, but your editor tells you that no, she can't be over 40.
Wow. That hurt right there.
No, believe me, I'm closer to Lily in the 90s.
Well, I was
You're
just going to
telling
say,
me the 90-year-old is more relatable. Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah, the faux old. Yeah, the editor saying, no, you can't have somebody over 40 is such an amazing thing to also happen during the Me Too movement.
Yeah. Just a touch.
Like, that hurt.
And when I
hurt
was
my old heart.
right, and when I was trying to tag this in post, I didn't want to give away too much, and I wasn't even sure if I should specifically do like the hashtag Me Too, because also I didn't want anybody thinking that Carol had been accused of something or was accusing anybody. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to come back to bite me, so I'll be careful here. But the fact that you have this issue and then showed how it's both in the cultural zeitgeist now, and yet is so not new even a little bit by tying together these different narratives. It just showed that, okay, there really is nothing new going on, and the problems that people faced in the 40s continued on through, and they just look a little different now.
Right. That women have been dealing with this stuff for forever. It's not a new thing at all.
No, and it's it's refreshing that we can openly talk about it now, but because we all know everybody has a story, and I feel like this book was personal to you because I believe you wrote about like your mom.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's in your afterword or whatever.
Yeah.
So
no, I've written about that, and that along with the thinking about the Magdalene laundry really the inspiration for the book came when I was watching Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testify in the Kavanaugh hearings, and I know a lot of women, there were all these posts afterwards of women feeling, crying at her testimony and relating their own story. And for me, I cried during it, but I was thinking about my mother who had died 2 years before that. And she had told me that she had been sexually assaulted in a hospital when she was 18, but she told it to me. She told me stories. I grew up on all of her stories, and she had a lot of traumatic things happen to her. But that story was kind of, she told very almost lightly and sort of later, and she didn't really, she didn't attribute a lot to that. But listening to Christine Blasey Ford talk about the sequelae, the after effect, the post-traumatic stress effect of the attack she had suffered, I realized that was my mother. My mother had this, this crippling anxiety all of her life, and slept with the light on all of her life. And she was claustrophobic and would shake when I would take her to a doctor. And I realized, listening to that, I was like, my mother had this post-traumatic stress from this assault. And I never really had put it together before. And that's when I realized that I wanted to kind of write about the aftermath of that. And a woman of a generation who I may have been the first person she told about that. She was ashamed of it when it happened. And, it's not something she would have gone around telling people. She may have told, I don't know, she may have told a couple other people, but I got the sense when she told me that, that this was new to her to tell it to somebody.
Yeah. I mean, my mother also had been assaulted and abused as a child. And she never talked about it until much later in her life. And then at first she did the same thing. She just kind of like almost like apologized for it. Like, and it's just like, it's amazing. Like the aftermath of that, not just on the person, but like on their, like everybody around. Like, so your mother sleeping with the light on, shaking when you bring her to a doctor, like that has created something in you.
Yeah.
Like,
it's what I grew up with, and the I probably inherited a lot of her anxieties, either through genetics or through being raised by that. So it did make me think about intergenerational trauma,
exactly,
and sort of trauma beyond the grave, if that's not given, how long lasting that is, how it would and what the effects might be through time, and how somebody might achieve finally some sort of closure. And of course, my mother was gone by the time I was thinking of this. And I've used elements of her life in quite a number of my books. A cousin asked at a reunion, have you ever thought of writing about your mother? And I was like, every book I write is about my mother.
People
clearly don't
ask
know
me
mother
that
very
too.
well.
They were just like, you should write your mom's story. I'm like, I have been.
Exactly. It's all, just breaking it down in many different facets, right?
It's like, would you like me to highlight the portions that are specifically biographical that I would write from our headlines? Ta-da!
Yeah, here they are.
But I like that you talked about the intergenerational aspect, because you also address that with your faux old character and how and as a parent, I saw this a lot in that someone may choose to do something that isn't necessarily in their own best interest in order to protect children or try to stop that trauma from kind of infecting that generational line, and how they might go about doing that, and that constant awareness. And then even, well, how would the mother feel about this, and how would the mother worry about her children going through this? Right. And you have that both with your faux older character, but also you've got your journalist character has a relationship with her mother as well. Right. So you kind of see it from both angles, playing both ways. And I thought you handled that really well, and just bringing that in added a depth to it that a lot of times you don't get in thrillers, where they're almost microscopically fixated on the one person going through it. And I don't know anybody who goes through any kind of trauma where it doesn't infect people around them in some way.
Right. And certainly as a parent, you're aware that, this is having an impact on my children and for my, let's just call her Melissa instead of
the faux old lady.
Melissa, especially because she's only a little bit older than me, and that name was super common in my generation. So giving Melissa being the old person name is just like, wait a second. No, you don't.
I was really in my brain picturing her like so much older than she was, until at one point it's like, as a 46-year-old or whatever.
I think she's just like 48.
I was like, oh, she's young.
I think she really started out older and had to sort of, I think she had to age down for some logistics. So, full disclosure, I probably thought of her as a little bit older as well. But yeah, she, so she has to really, and what she has to cope with is, I think, being the wife of somebody who's accused of being a sexual predator. We always wonder, I think, how much did that woman know? And what effect might my choices have had on my children? So, her journey, I think, and the other very important thing about Melissa, when I started writing her point of view, at first I was like, I didn't start out writing. I was just from Joan's point of view, the younger woman, in the beginning of the book. But the problem was Joan, has this little PTSD problem and really doesn't go out much. And this is before COVID. And, she goes to that apartment and starts ordering Grubhub and, which seemed timely to me.
Direct.
Yeah, direct. I had to look a lot of this up, what do the hip people look, what do the younger people order? And then she meets Lily and, the neighbor next door. And I realized, this book is going to be
it's internal.
Her apartment talking to an old woman while ordering Grubhub. Somebody has to get out and, do something. And Melissa, right away, I realized, although there were things, I just thought, okay, so I need this other point of view. And I thought, I wasn't sure, what it would be like writing her. But one of the things I loved about her right away is she just gets out there. She goes and does things and, doesn't have that. She's not stuck in the apartment, and she's competent. She's good at getting things done. And so that immediately, that to me gave her an appeal and just made her more interesting. She's somebody who can, and she's also now outside of her comfort zone because she's living in a neighborhood she never would have lived in, and riding the subway, which wasn't something she always did, and meeting a lot of young people. And I thought that was, like women in their 20s. So all the millennial characters that sort of pass through are all versions of my daughter and stepdaughter and my niece, versions of them.
I figured I loved like the Instagram parts where you're like, oh, this is her there when you were describing like the millennials Instagram feeds. I was just like, yes.
urban
That is.
explorer. They're
Tea
all
enthusiast. I'm like, I think
Hey.
I've seen these people's actual profiles. I think somebody somewhere is mad at you, Carol, for just ripping some of that straight off of Instagram.
one of my daughter's fellow waitresses at the tea shop that she worked at pre-COVID, because and actually my daughter worked with us. So how would you track down if you wanted to sort of find somebody? And she actually talked me through that entire part. And I did go to the Instagram account of her tea parlor and read all that.
Love it.
They're
Love
all
it.
enthusiasts and urban explorers, which wasn't afraid.
I'm also an urban explorer, so I was excited about that. I'm like, yay, my weird hobby just got a mention in a Carol Goodman book. But I feel like the more I turn into a faux older age, the less urban exploring I do, because I used to just be like, who cares if this building's abandoned and we get arrested? Who cares if I fall through the floor? And now I'm
get
just like,
tetanus, but landing on something
and now
rusty.
I'm just like, oh, that floor looks weird. Let's not go in.
And now if you fall, you break a hip, so it's not good.
No.
I don't think either of you are in that category. So
You don't know how brittle our bones are.
That, and we've all been inactive for COVID, so everything's kind of just
I know.
wilted in on itself, and all the muscles.
I used to be a
atrophy.
dancer, and now I'm just like, basically, I am your character, Joan. I just like sit inside my house, and
I think we all became Joan. So it wasn't
Yeah.
rereading and editing the book. At one point, the book originally, it's set in 2018 now. I mean, that's the published book is. And originally I did have it set in 2018. But as you probably know, what sometimes happens is when the book's ready to come out, you bump it up a little bit and and let's make it as contemporary as possible. But when my editor and I looked at that, we were like,
you can't make it 2020 because that's not what the world looked like.
No, and you can't even make it 2021 because then everybody's like, well, yeah, she lives in her apartment and never comes out. We all do, and some of us never wanted to come back out. So you don't even want somebody who's lived through that, because then there's a whole new level of PTSD from COVID that nobody wants to put in there. So the best you just
we were going to make it 2019 and actually had through a draft until the copy editor said there's a epilogue that takes place the following spring, and we're like,
oh yeah, nope.
There was no spring
yeah,
of 2020.
no spring.
Exactly. So,
Didn't happen.
yeah.
No, we are still weirdly in the depths of winter of 2020.
Yes.
It never stopped.
It's never stopped. It's fine. It's fine. We're healthy. 3 people healthy right here.
Yes.
Cheers to that.
Cheers to that.
I loved Melissa as a character, and she's not easy to like, but I loved her.
Yeah.
I didn't like her, but I loved her.
Good.
So I'm so glad that you did the multiple POV, so I could we could get into her head for a little while, even though I was physically screaming at her while reading the book on the exercise bike, which is how I do COVID now.
Yeah.
Like,
I was going to say that's probably good for your cardiovascular system, for that lung expansion.
Little anger, yeah. Gets the heart going.
No, but she's an interesting character, because when you're saying she's competent at doing stuff, I'm like, and you mean having people do things for her that maybe she shouldn't be having them do, because I loved seeing how she, even in a new place and in a new system, kind of figures out how to manipulate all the different systems she goes through. And
the doorman.
Yes, and watching her become more self-aware as things go on, but at some point, I'm not sure she ever got to the point where she realized, yeah, maybe some of the things and the ways I manipulate systems and people might be something that isn't an admirable quality, even if it has been helpful to this date. But maybe it's something I should look at changing.
Baby steps. Baby steps.
Baby steps.
I'd like to think that she's seeing a good therapist now.
Yeah. No, and a good Reiki master and
Hi, Daniel.
Getting the work done, and yeah, no, I think she's progressing and has grown through her.
She's healing.
She's healing, has a better relationship with her children, lives in a new neighborhood. No, I think she's doing well. But it's yes, and I don't think not everything, not every bit of her entitlement or is all gone. But yeah, no, I liked it. She was a challenge to write. And she was also just fun to write because like anything that, I mean, there are many qualities I gave her. Like at one point she says, she makes the observation, you want something more, someone else wants it.
Yes.
And she compares it to, you've been looking at something on a website and all of a sudden it's sold out. And then it's like, oh my God, I have to have it. And she describes then like calling stores. And it's like, I may have done that once or twice.
I feel like I have a vague memory of doing this. And again, this is like hitting close to where your book is, like over a Burberry purse.
It's like, what do you mean it's sold out? I must have it now.
I know.
Well, and I feel like this shows how different people respond to things, because I know for me, if I want something and I'm not sure about it, and then I go back and it's gone, that's when I realize I really did want it, because then I'm mad. But it's all internal. It's all like, why didn't I do this? And that's why I have massive FOMO and make really bad decisions, because I have those kind of still taunting me that, hey, remember that time when you didn't act, limited time offer, so you do it, and then you wholly regret the entire endeavor. And what are you going to do? But because I've never gotten on the phone and gone, go track down that thing for me. It's just gone. I'm never going to get it.
This is why my wardrobe is ridiculous now, because I never say no. I'm like, that gown is gorgeous. We've been locked down for a year and a half. Am I going to an event where I need a gown? No. Did I buy a gown? Yes.
Yes. You deserve it.
Why aren't you wearing it on our show?
I mean, because we've been in lockdown, I can't fit into it now.
Well, there's that problem.
Because I was going to say, for our anniversary show, I did wear a gown that I purchased because I'd only worn it, I think, twice. And I'm going, when else am I going to wear purple sequins?
Yeah.
No one cares if I'm wearing them now, so I did.
Yeah. No, it's you can
with I wore my burlesque jewelry. Like I was just like, look, we're doing stuff. We're all dressed up.
Yeah.
Fancy.
So there's a little Melissa in all of us. I like to.
I think, and in some people, there's a lot of Melissa.
There's a lot of Melissa, and I grew up amongst many Melissas. So I am akin to that. There's part of me that's there.
And that's why you understood the voice so well. You could just channel it.
Did. Even though there were times I felt like I was, making. Well, it was fun to do the juxtaposition between what Joan sees as a 20-something living, with very little money in the city, and Melissa, who's been living in a fancy house in Westchester. So so they both think about Inwood. Joan's like, wow, this is, this apartment is the most luxurious I've ever been in. And this is such a cute neighborhood. And Joan's like, what a dump. I can't believe I have to live here.
Her response to the linen closet, I think, which is like, I could even fit. And then she lists like how many duvets she could fit. How many duvets do you have that aren't already on a bed? And she's like, I couldn't even fit this many duvets in there. That was such a wow.
And then I was thinking, you have a linen closet.
Yeah. Yeah, the apartment, as I'm sure I fed a lot of, Manhattan real estate lust by talking about an apartment like that, which is just completely out of reach of most people. But there are those lovely, I was going to say before, so Inwood, that park is just a park now. There are no fancy apartment buildings there, but just on the next ridge, you have the cloisters. And then you have, going south, you have then the Washington Heights, and you have, there are some beautiful Gothic apartment buildings there. So I felt like I had enough precedent to sort of bring them up.
Yes.
And I didn't do the deep dive because I figured with some of the details you were including, it couldn't be a real place that people currently were living at, or you would end up getting sued because they're like, there are no security breaches like that. And our doormen, they would never.
People can't just escape up onto the roof out of like a weird back staircase.
That's true. Yeah. It probably would not make code. And some co-op board would be coming for me.
Oh, the co-op boards. Yeah. Yes, they would.
They would.
But for a couple extra $100, we can make that go away.
So no, it couldn't exactly be a real place. But I did picture it I pictured where it was in the park. And the Irish bar she goes to, there is actually a restaurant Indian Road Cafe, right where in that same location.
Where Black Rose is.
Where the Black Rose is, yeah. So that was fun. It was fun making up restaurants. It was also fun, poignantly, as I was writing it, and especially and doing the edits during COVID, at one point, I was working with my, much younger editor, and she was like, we were like, where would Melissa go to lunch? And so, we went back and forth, and my editor said, oh, there's this buvette. It's this lovely French, and I'm looking it up going like, I want to go to buvette.
I just want to go anywhere.
Right. So I kind of like lost, talk about going down a rabbit hole. It's like looking up all those tea rooms and places. The tea room my daughter worked in that she had stopped working in because of COVID. So it was almost that the book became, there was like a lost world of New York. There's the refuge, the apartment building I was making up. But as I was, finishing it up and doing the edits for it, the whole, New York world felt a little bit like a lost world.
Yeah. Honestly, even just like the subway scenes seemed like almost like right now it's like a ghost story. Like, even though I know everything's opened back up in New York, to me, it still seems so out of reach, like being on a subway and like having like a creepy man spreader maybe touching your leg during a blackout. And like such a New York thing that happens.
Right.
And I'm like,
nostalgic.
I know. I was like, oh gosh, I miss that.
Yeah.
Oh,
hi.
Paula!
Yeah. I love that picture with her dog.
Oh my gosh. Paula is my amazing, lovely agent. And
she's great. We have met, I think, at Goodman. Yeah. So
yeah. I'm like, maybe you'll come back sometime.
Well, I actually was looking at registering for Crime Bake and hoping that it was, all still going to.
It is. Well, we're planning an in-person event with an online component. So even if because nobody knows what's happening, that would be great to have you there. Then we could like drink in person.
Wow.
As Paula's like, Jennifer, don't make it be about the drinking.
You know what?
Why not?
It can include the drinking, but it's not about the
Your
drinking.
It's not about the drinking.
No, it's about the connection and talking amongst authors, which is so much fun. Thank you.
Which is like why we do the show.
Paula's like, we're signing Carol up.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Carol, honestly, like every time you're on the show, you're such a joy. This is now your second time. You're our first guest that's come back twice.
Wow.
We have another two-timer coming up in like a couple months. And that's Wendy Webb. I think you know Wendy.
Wendy Webb. Oh, one of my favorite.
Two-timers are bad for you.
No, we should say repeat guest or back by demand, not two-timer, because that sounds like a person running around on their significant other. So
yeah, that does.
And now we're back to Carol's book. So.
I love Wendy Webb.
Full circle. Yes, Wendy's awesome.
Yeah, she's great. And I love that. Talk about the Gothic. That she does that.
She makes me want to travel to the Great Lakes.
Well, that's the whole Minneapolis.
I know. There you go. I was like, oh, Minneapolis, that's Wendy Webb country.
Exactly.
That's something I could be excited about. I've been after her to do like tours where like, she can make a little side income, like the Wendy Webb tour of like the fake haunted places.
Islands.
The little islands.
I would go on that. That's all. Let's all sign up for that. I'll do a tour of Inwood.
That would be great.
When we're all back, we'll just walk through the park.
Just be like, this is where the historic Magdalene refuge was.
Yeah.
I'm down for all the tea shops and just sampling all the scones as we go through.
Oh, the scones.
Love that.
Yeah, I love all the tea shops of New York. Would be fun.
That would be great.
More to do.
Carol, I hate to say goodbye, but we are out of time. Thank you for being here. As always, you are amazing.
So fun. You both are like such a delight to be with and fun to. Thank you for reading the book. Thanks for
We loved it.
Having me on.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Allison, of course. Thank you
you.
to everybody at the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. This has been a copywritten podcast by the Global Authors on the Air Radio Network. Next week, stay tuned. We have Megan Collins with her new novel, The Family Plot.
Ooh.
So we will see you next week.